Hello everyone, I'm Danny Roddy, and today we're going to read over The Baldness Field, which is a new article on DannyRoddy.com. I wanted to supplement the articles with audio because sometimes it can be too long to read. I used to do this a while ago, but found it to be a little too annoying to do all the time. But I think I have a better schedule now, releasing articles about twice a month, and I think I can do it for each article if you guys enjoy it. So please let me know via social media or Facebook or Twitter if you enjoy these things, and I'll keep doing them. They're kind of fun to do, so hopefully you enjoy them too. So let's get into it. The Baldness Field. This was released May 18th, 2015. There are real differences between the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital regions of the scalp. Mainline baldness research typically attributes these differences to the area's sensitivity to androgens, but a recent shift has taken place, propelling hair loss research out of the Dark Ages towards an era of holism. The shift began with Garza et al.'s landmark 2012 discovery that Prostaglandin D2 inhibited hair growth and accumulated in the scalps of balding men. Prostaglandin D2 is synthesized from the essential fatty acid arachidonic acid, which is majorly produced from linoleic acid in the liver. This discovery reorients hair loss research in the direction of environmental factors rather than solely relying on genetic explanations. Problematic theories. The discovery that prostaglandin D2 is involved in baldness might also shed light on the somewhat mysterious horseshoe shape or baldness field typical of pattern hair loss. But before we get too far, we should go over some problematic theories that attempt to explain the phenomenon. Number 1, the skull expansion theory of pattern hair loss. The baldness field as a result of skull expansion was challenged as early as 1954. Changes in skull size, which generally occur throughout age in both sexes, don't appear to be associated with baldness. The idea has experienced somewhat of a resurgence with the 2009 paper Big Head, Bald Head, which I wrote about here. I appreciate the author's out-of-the-box view of pattern hair loss, but I don't think it shapes a realistic view of what's happening in the balding organism. Moreover, it tends to lead to aggressively stupid therapies, i.e. dissolving skull bone. Number 2, the ivory dome theory of pattern hair loss. In the 2013 book Hair Like a Fox, I mentioned Frederick Hosel's famous ivory dome theory of pattern baldness. In short, Hosel observed that bald cadavers had calcified, solid ivory scalps, while specimens with luxurious hair contained no such anomaly. Because pattern baldness is associated with hormones and signaling substances that negatively influence bone metabolism, I think it's likely that the intracellular accumulation of calcium is involved in the genesis of pattern baldness. However, whether that involves a solid ivory calcified scalp, I don't know. Is the spontaneous reversal of pattern baldness in cases of neonates, pregnancy, and male-to-female transgender due to the quick dissolution of a solid ivory dome? I think more research is needed. Number 3, the androgen receptor theory. The androgen receptor supposedly serves as a link between the inherited physiological state and the hormonal milieu needed for pattern baldness to manifest. If I understand the myth correctly, the balding area of the scalp, the frontoparietal region, has an increased amount of androgen receptors, or the androgen receptors are more sensitive. The interaction between dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, and the androgen receptor initiates a series of unfavorable events that has yet to be identified, leading to hair loss. A minimal amount of effort reveals that high levels of androgen receptors are found in people who aren't balding, and that the sensitivity argument apparently holds no water. Moreover, the male androgen receptor is activated by the adaptive stress hormone prolactin, which is increased by the so-called female hormone estrogen. This fact, I think, completely invalidates the current model of androgen-driven inherited male pattern baldness. Transplanted hairs. Another idea that needs to be addressed is that the transplanted hairs from non-balding areas grow undisturbed in balding zones. If this were always true, it would support the near universal contention that hair follicles are genetically pre-programmed to destruct at a certain time in an organism's life without aid from the environment. In reality, transplanted hairs are affected by their environment and change over time. In fact, the diameters of transplanted hairs tend to become significantly reduced. In a strange experiment, balding hair follicles quickly regenerated and grew as well as or better after being grafted onto an immunodeficient mouse. Similarly, replacing the blood supply of balding hair follicles significantly increased their rate of growth and vitality. Perhaps there is something in the blood that causes baldness, similar to what Alex Carroll noted in the 1930s with his immortal heart cells. The Baldness Field. The gallia is often the focus of pattern baldness research, labeling the temporal and occipital regions non-balding zones or androgen-insensitive areas, while the frontoparietal region of the scalp usually takes the hardest hit in pattern baldness, at least for males. All of the regions of the scalp are affected negatively. In a 2002 paper, Dr. Jared Siri warns that surgical intervention in the gallia is difficult and bloody, and that the gallia, when compared to other regions of the scalp, is particularly unforgiving to medical mistakes. Perhaps the increased number of complications involving the gallia is due to the false belief that it has a superabundant blood supply, which appears to be related to the genesis of baldness. In 1980, Klemp et al. Concluded that the blood supply is reduced in the bald tissues relative to controls. In 1990, Tashatani et al. Demonstrated relatively reduced flow in the central scalp of male pattern baldness patients. In 1996, Goldman et al. Found significant microvascular insufficiency in regions of the scalp that lose hair and an associated relative tissue hypoxia. A reduction of peripheral blood flow isn't a random event. Hormones and signaling substances direct the phenomenon. For example, in the 1970s, W.D. Denkla found that the activation of the pituitary reduced peripheral tissues such as the hands, head, feet, etc. response to thyroid hormones, decreasing their oxygen consumption. The pituitary activates the parasympathetic nervous system and has a direct connection to mast cells throughout the body. Mast cells are found in most tissues, but are particularly concentrated in locations that are in close contact with the external environment, such as skin, hair follicles, airways, and the intestines. As early as 1975, it's been known that balding areas of the scalp contain an increased number of mast cells. In 2014, it was reconfirmed that this area defined a field vulnerable to pattern hair loss. The amount of mast cells in a given tissue is influenced by hormones and signaling substances involved in stress. For example, the number of mast cells in the uterus was shown to fluctuate during the estrus cycle. Ovary-ectomized mice, in which estradiol and progesterone are almost absent, have less mast cells compared to control non-ovary-ectomized animals. Estrogen alone restored the number of uterine mast cells after ovary-ectomization, which was comparable to the levels observed in control mice. In addition to increasing the number of mast cells in a given tissue, estrogen induces mast cell degranulation, releasing inflammatory agents such as histamine, prostaglandin, serotonin, and nitric oxide. In contrast, carbon dioxide, which is produced under the direction of good thyroid function, inhibits mast cell degranulation. The intensity of this inflammatory cascade is probably most influenced by the type of fat consumed over a lifetime, i.e. saturated versus unsaturated. For example, the unsaturated fats are estrogenic and work in the opposite direction of the thyroid-driven oxidative metabolism. Metabolic stress tends to increase estrogen, and in a vicious cycle, estrogen intensifies metabolic stress. Part of estrogen's ability to intensify the stress response is by activating enzymes that synthesize the pro-inflammatory prostaglandins, an anti-estrogenic approach. The genesis of pattern baldness and the subsequent realization of the baldness field appears to stem from metabolic stress, or a reduced rate of metabolism. Because the rate of metabolism is influenced by so many hormones and signaling substances, I think the best way to increase metabolic functioning is to start with a solid nutritional foundation. Nutritional approaches for baldness are sometimes met with laughter, which appears to be due to a strong cultural bias that only drugs with life-altering side effects are useful for hair growth. I think this is a serious error, as a good diet, a thyroid supplement, and a little aspirin would appear to take care of many of the problems leading to the genesis of pattern baldness. Rather than rehashing all of the dietary suggestions contained in the book Hair Like a Fox, I'll mention a few that chronically tend to be absent in the diets of those who are experiencing hair loss. Number 1, the calcium to phosphate ratio. A high calcium intake in relation to dietary phosphate, limits the secretion of parathyroid hormone. An excess of parathyroid hormone causes mast cells to leak various inflammatory mediators associated with baldness. Phosphate comes packaged in all foods, but meeting the amount of phosphate in the diet with calcium can be difficult without the inclusion of milk, cheese, or supplemental eggshells. In addition to regularly including the calcium-rich foods in the diet, fructose can help balance the calcium-phosphate ratio. Number 2, the supplemental foods. In my limited experience, it is common for those who are seeking to overcome hair loss to be taking many dietary supplements, but rarely include very nutritious foods in their diet, such as ruminant liver, oysters, and egg yolks. Baldness is associated with various nutritional deficiencies such as copper, zinc, and possibly other nutrients. I think including a portion of beef liver and oysters each week, along with eggs every day, is a safer, cheaper, and less confusing way to obtain nutrients that support general resistance to stress. Number 3, the resting temperature and pulse. The rate of metabolism is represented by the cyclical rise and fall of the body temperature and pulse rate. Thyroid hormone tends to increase the temperature, while estrogen, serotonin, and prolactin tend to reduce it. Obtaining full nutrition while increasing the resting temperature and pulse rate, I think, is a good strategy for combating the complex biochemical web of unfavorable events that lead to hair aging. That concludes the Baldness Field, which can be found on DannyRoddy.com along with all the references. Thanks for listening.